It is finally time to get back on this thing here. Been a little bit overdue. And we're gonna jump straight back into a bunch of metal work on this thing. Some pretty big pieces here as well. That being the quarter panels, tail panel, gonna have to do trunk gutters. And I'm not so sure about this piece yet. The kind of trunk gutter section of it will at least need to be replaced on the front and back, so I might just replace the whole piece, but we'll see when the time comes. I started messing with this side the other night, just kind of chipping away at some of the Bondo and wire wheeling to see exactly what we got going on. Pretty solid chunk came off that corner there, so that should give you a little bit of an indication of what we're working with. Unfortunately, this isn't even the worst of the sides. This side over here is far worse. You can see this little kind of piece that I've chiseled away. There's multiple different layers of Bondo right there. So I'm not sure if this thing has been in multiple accidents or if that's what they just needed to do to repair that one section, but we shall see. Probably the worst spot of it was this hole right here that had one entire giant patch of Bondo on top of it. When it's truth. If you guys go back and check out that power washing video, you can see kind of what this car started out as when I bought it. Did not think it was going to turn into this, but once you start picking away at things and replacing other pieces, it just goes downhill from there. I'm merely doing this just for the YouTube entertainment factor right now, but as you can see, the Bondo on this quarter is pretty gnarly. Like, that is genuinely pretty impressive how thick that is. That's at least a 1/4 inch right there, and it's 2 different layers. So dig away. I think that's the thickest spot in the entire quarter, but I guess we'll kind of see how far it spreads, because there's not, can't really tell because the wheel well's right in there, but there doesn't appear to be a huge dent back there. Chipped at this a little bit more here just to kind of see how far this patch spread out, and unfortunately, not that it really matters because it's all coming off anyway, but I don't think there is a spot of just metal on this quarter panel. Like, I thought it was going to thin out, and it did, but eventually I was expecting it to thin out into nothing. But quite literally everywhere, it's at least got a little bit of Bondo. That's kind of impressive. The unfortunate thing is the guy who did all this back in the day probably thought he was doing something special too, but it was special, all right. You can see here pretty good though that this quarter was replaced at some point, or at least reattached, where it's all welded along this seam right here. And I think some Bondo that was on top of it did get underneath this at some point, because this is a lot more pitted than the rest of the top of the quarter is. So that's pretty rough. I like vinyl tops on some cars, but this right here is unfortunately the downside to them. I mean, it just absolutely destroys the roof skin that's underneath it, traps moisture and whatnot. So pretty good example of what a vinyl top will do right there. And I don't know if I misspoke earlier or not, but this thing was parked in 1984. I think I said 1989 earlier because it sat for exactly 39 years. So in the lifespan of this being on the road for 14 years at least, all this kind of happened, which is wild to think about. Granted, I'm assuming, considering I found the car in Ohio, it probably was an Ohio-based car its whole life, because the guy I purchased it from said he purchased it from either the coach or another parent on his son's t-ball team. That is all I got out of the story of this car. And then it was parked due to something engine related. If you haven't seen that video, I tried to fire this thing up about a year ago now. It's a pretty interesting one. Found some interesting things that were going on with the engine there, but in the end, did get it to run. Once he had some engine issues with the car, he said his son started to take it apart, and I think that explains why the front fenders had about half the paint ground off of them. They were bare metal. When I found it, I think like the valve covers were off, but believe it or not, when I found it, the key was still in the ignition. So that part was there. That was pretty neat, but I'm assuming all of this here combined with the engine issues, like the previous owner said, is probably the reason this car was ultimately parked. Quarter panel is officially off, and first impressions of seeing what's truly underneath is pretty much what I expected. Nothing crazy, just kind of seeing how this roof structure gets all pieced together. The roof structure is one thing I do need to and want to retain as much as possible. All the sheet metal can obviously, you know, be replaced, but at the end of the day, it all goes back to that roof structure there, and that is the main part of the car here. The rest of this wheel well will have to come out. The only reason I left this in place is because it has this support right here, which has the, I guess, rods and the tension rods for the trunk. I also got that deck lid all lined the best I could. It's just pretty good. It's just a little high on that corner, but other than that, everything looks pretty good. So I wanted to get that set in place. That way I can use it as a reference point if needed. Also just a peace of mind having that lined up with the tail panel, and the trunk gutters will be good. But everything else underneath looks as you'd expect. A lot of skylight coming through right there. Just kind of seeing how bad it really is, how this quarter gets all pieced together. And this angle right here is not something that you see every day, especially on, you know, restoration shows and whatnot. I feel like they never show this type of stuff. So gonna give my best to give an in-depth look at exactly what we got going on here. Learning as I go, watching a decent amount of videos to try to figure this out. But at the end of the day, it's all metal. That's good and bad part about it. Metal's expensive, tricky to work with. You can make anything essentially that you want out of it. Just cut, weld, and paint it, pretty much it. If you want to simplify it, just getting the measurements right, getting everything braced up, make sure nothing moves. So I think I'm just gonna start picking my way at it. Obviously this was such a big piece right here, but now this is removed, I mean, get a lot more visibility here. I'll be able to fully weld this brace to that side of the tail panel. So that's another benefit to that. Got this brace, which goes up to the trunk gutter. So looking pretty good thus far. Probably have to add some more bracing as we go, but kind of cool just to step back and see this, because obviously it's a big piece gone. Not necessarily progress, I'd say, but it does have me excited for all the new metal that'll be on there. Got the roof structure brace all welded in place last night on the driver's side here. Just pretty simple 90 that comes off the table right there, goes all the way up and then welds on to the kind of flat spot of the roof structure there. So that's looking all pretty good. Now that this is done, I can go through and start trimming away all this little stuff, start taking this apart piece by piece, because that is solidly mounted to the table. I got to go through and do the passenger side right now, so I got that all welded up, weld that to the table, make another one of these kind of wedges for the top piece, get that side secured, and then it's just more drilling out spot welds and taking all the rust off. Might not look much different than it has since I cut the quarters off, but this is all a day's worth of work. All these little scraps, all these spot welds I've had to drill out, so the quarters are officially all torn off. Good and bad news. Good news is that they're all off and I got a blank slate. Some of these pieces are pretty solid. Everything where the quarters attached to the roof skin and the rear window channel is all pretty much shot as expected. Really wish this corner for the rear deck filler panel kind of was attached to that, but is what it is there. The roof skin area was pretty shot. I ended up just cutting that section out. This is all just kind of a mess. So whether I do a whole new roof skin is still in question, or if I just kind of cut this section out right here and fill that in rather than fill that seam with lead or body filler, we'll just have an overlap full metal to metal transition. We'll see. Other than that, everything else I pretty much could see with the quarters still on the car. I went ahead and left all this structure here and some of the package tray as well, though that will probably be getting cut out anyway. There's pros and cons to taking a car this far apart. Obviously, the pro side of it is it'll all be brand new. It'll all be fresh. You know how it's done. You know it's done right. The con side of it is it takes a long time. It's a lot of work. It's discouraging at times. And then you end up with stuff like this. You go back and forth on exactly what you want to do. So while I'm cutting this all apart here, I'm trying to go through my head and plan out what I want to do. It gives me time to think about, you know, what pieces I want to make my own, what I want to fix. So we'll get into that in the next video here. I think I got a pretty good solid game plan of the first pieces that'll need to be addressed. I got to go through, clean up this, put some rust converter on the roof structure, the pieces that'll be staying, get some paint on that, so that'll be good. Need to work on that rear window channel, especially that lower part where the quarter will kind of sit on top of that, and get everything basically prepped for the new sheet metal. So when the quarters get here, can start messing around with those, messing around with the tail panel. We'll kind of see where it all goes from there. Bracing this all up definitely helped when cutting it apart here. Those big braces I built to go onto the roof structure here were absolute key to ensuring that this does not move anywhere. These ones here are nice for the tail panel because I know this tail panel is bent, but it'll give me a reference point, especially for the trunk gutters here as well. I went through and measured everything beforehand, but like I said, since I know this is twisted or, you know, some corners are bent in and whatnot, those measurements are more or less going to be reference points. I need to go through and find a book that has all the exact measurement points for everything. When I did the front clip and built the braces for those, I was just looking at forums, and you get so many different, you know, opinions or measurements, or you don't know if people's measurements are right from the right points. So you need to find an exact book from Chrysler, preferably from the 70s, that has all the measurements for this. That'll make life a lot easier when it comes to getting these quarter panels on it. But that's gonna wrap it up for this video here. So I appreciate everyone watching. I know there wasn't a whole lot of work. It was more or less just talking, but sometimes you need those videos. And in the next one here, I'm hoping we can kind of get this section situated, get it solid, and get all the rust out of this area right here.